Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Luke Zebroski with RMS Roller Grinder, and I have here with me today Dr. Adam Krull, who is part of the global nutrition team for Pioneer. And today we're going to discuss the Plenish bean that is getting a lot of attention and buzz in the feed industry right now. Adam, appreciate you joining us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to be here.
All right, let's just jump right in. We'll start simple here, but Adam, let us know what is the big difference between a Plenish bean and your standard soybean that's been around for however many years?
Yep. Good place to start. Essentially, the Plenish beans are considered a high oleic soybean, and these were developed about 15 years ago for the food industry. The oil itself has some unique cooking properties. It lasts longer in fryers. It does a nicer job cooking in fryers. And essentially, what in the soybean they did is there's a natural gene or enzyme that converts oleic acid to linoleic acid. And we basically deactivated that gene. And so there's very little difference between these soybeans and a conventional, a commodity soybean, other than the oil profile is slightly different. So it has less linoleic acid and more oleic acid. And other than that, we didn't insert a gene. We didn't do anything crazy to the soybeans. The nice part is you don't have any yield drag issues. The soybean itself is a great soybean, not hardly any different than any soybean you would raise traditionally, other than when you extract that oil for the cooking side of it, it's got those beneficial properties. And then as we get into the why it's gaining traction on the feed side, the linoleic acid is a fatty acid in dairy cows that causes some problems. It's toxic to cows' rumen, and too much of it lowers the milk fat in dairy cows. And we've been able to use these soybeans as a supplement on the dairy side, and the less linoleic has some benefits, and we're finding that the oleic itself actually has some really nice positive health benefits for the cows as well.
Got it. That's interesting that it started in for human consumption
Yeah, and it's
first.
still it's not a product that we repurposed. We had it for one purpose and it took a different purpose. It still has a ton of demand on the food side. There's a lot of demand
Okay,
for this oil, and so the dairy side has just been a nice complement to the food side as well.
awesome. So I guess, and you alluded to it a little bit, but why are you starting to see these dairy farmers now include the high oleic soybeans into their feed production? And maybe there's outside of dairy, but dairy is really where we've seen a high amount of buzz or requests for these beans.
Where this started was in 2019. There were several universities who came out with some nice feed trials that showed the positive benefits of feeding soybeans in dairy cows. These were unbiased trials. We provided the beans, but they were the ones wanting to study the high oleic soybeans in these dairy cattle. And the the dairies heard about it. They saw the data and they were like, "Yeah, we would like to try this." And it hit a perfect time. It hit when we had really high butterfat prices, so anything you could do to bring up your milk fat had a really positive benefit. And also, this was early in the pandemic, 2020, 2021, where some of the other supplemental fats like palm fat got really expensive. And so we saw this perfect storm of, hey, let's see if we can use these high oleic soybeans in our diets, save some money, and also bring in a higher milk fat into production. And this really what started on the East Coast. A lot of folks in Pennsylvania and New York were the ones that picked this up, and partly because there was a lot of dairies in that area that were already feeding some whole soybeans, some roasted soybeans in one way, shape, or form. So there were some mobile roasters out there. There were some companies who would sell you roasted beans. And so they were quick to pick up on this. And anything in the dairy industry, it's such a global network of nutritionists that guys were hearing such positive results of feeding Plenish. We're seeing it move across the rest of the country, and we're seeing a lot of demand for trying to figure out how to roast these beans and all the things that go along with a homegrown forage or homegrown feed stuff.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. And this might be a little bit of a loaded question for you, but is there ideal particle size for digestibility in the cow that is a target as of right now? I know me specifically, when I've had numerous conversations with end users that are looking at bringing these onto their farm in a roaster or even commercial feed mills, it seems like it's all over the board right now. And I was wondering if you could shed some light on that for us.
Yeah, and this is a complicated question. And just yesterday, I was on a call with a mill that was asking me these same questions. And unfortunately, we don't have a perfect answer yet. It's an area that we're collecting data and we're studying. Some of the original university reports basically determined we have to process them in one way, shape, or form. We can't feed them whole. The the old dogma with feeding soybeans in general was we don't want to fine grind them. We want to keep them in this quarters and eighths and just break them up a little bit. But that was because that linoleic acid that we talked about was really toxic to the rumen. So we didn't want to expose that oil rapidly in the rumen or we'd cause big problems in that rumen. What we found is that this oleic is much safer in the rumen, and so we can get by with a smaller particle size. A lot of the university research was done around 7 to 800 microns, and that wasn't necessarily them predicting that was the right. That was just what they could get. The local
Yeah,
mill could get them 7 to 800 microns, and so you'll see that published or that recommended a lot. But we do see a number of folks grinding it finer. And I think that's where we're still learning. And some people who started at 7 or 800 weren't seeing the response that they were looking for. And when they went finer, they got a really nice bump in the output, whether it was milk fat or milk production. And I think there's some differences in herds and what other feedstuffs are in there. I think the herds that are seeing that response at a lower grind size are ones that maybe were a little bit starved for energy to begin with. So you're bringing some of that energy from the fat of the soybean, whereas some of the ones that are a little bit higher on the micron size, maybe that's just they need more of a slow release oil in those diets. And it's one of those things where I think each farm has to play with it a little bit. The roasting process, which is something we have to do to the soybeans, that will increase rumen bypass protein, but fine grinding negates some of that. You could say, well, I'm just going to fine grind it because it's safe. But when you do that, you also lose a little bit of that bypass protein. So it's a give and a take on the exact right grind size. But I think it's somewhere in there. I don't think I would want to go less than 400, and I think you get greater than 7 or 800. That gets to be too coarse. So it gets somewhere in that ballpark.
that's good. You alluded to it a little bit with the roaster, but let's say a feed mill decides that they're going to bring these high oleic or Plenish beans into their facility. What type of changes to their milling equipment or process are they going to have to make outside of the roaster?
Not a lot. The biggest thing is the roaster, and a roaster isn't quite as simple as just buying one and installing it. There's some pieces to it. There's an art. If a mill's never roasted soybeans before, there's a
Yep,
lot to it. The
yep,
temperature of the bean going in, the moisture of the bean going in. You need to hold that hot temp longer on the way out, and that's problematic for a lot of the roasters that are on the market today. Is how do you hold that temp? I always correlate it to, well, especially a propane fired roaster is like searing a steak on really high heat. That's good, but we need to let that steak rest for that heat to penetrate the entire bean. And so without that step, you can do a poor job of roasting. But other than that, the biggest thing right now is segregation. We did make a commitment to the soybean trade that these will not enter the commodity stream. Not that they are a stewarded product or not that they are approved for export. It's just that oil profile will change the cooking properties of a commercial soybean oil. So we need to make sure that we keep these segregated. Pioneer will set you up as a receiving location and supply you or help you with an NIR, a real-time NIR machine, so you can ensure that the beans you're receiving are what they're supposed to be. They are the high oleic soybeans, and you're not receiving a conventional commodity soybean as well.
Have you seen any specific milling equipment used to reduce particle size in the field, whether that's a hammer mill, roller mill, whatever other kind of technologies out there?
We've seen everything because
Yeah.
a lot of the on-farm guys, they're just using whatever they have, and that might be a hammer mill that they're using for corn, or just a roller mill that they had laying around. You've got some of these really small dairies just using like a grinder mixer, a portable grinder mixer,
Yep.
to try to hammer mill them down. As I'm sure you know better than anybody, the distribution of particle size is much higher in a hammer mill than a roller mill. So if you want to fine tune it to an exact number, a roller mill can get you there. But today we don't know exactly the right particle size anyway. Maybe in the future, once we know we need to be at this particle size, having some more control over that would be ideal.
So, in your crystal ball, do you see this high oleic soybean or Plenish bean soybean craze becoming more widespread in the future? Or if it's not, like what factors are going to drive it, and what could potentially hinder this adoption?
What I tell people is if you could go out to the marketplace and just buy Plenish soybeans that are roasted and processed, every dairy in the U.S. would buy them. They're absolutely a great feedstuff. They fit every ration in the country. The logistics become the issue. There are parts of the country that are not planting soybeans. They just don't work in certain geographies, or they don't have the acres to plant soybeans. But we're seeing, because there's a fair amount of profit and excitement around here, we have several large logistics companies looking into this. They're saying, how can I grow these in the Midwest and rail it to the West Coast?
Yep.
And let's put up our own roasting and processing facility right on the rail, and let's provide a feedstuff to these geographies that currently don't have the capability to grow them locally. That's a big thing, is whether that's somebody stepping in there as a third party or having dairies put up their own facilities. We're seeing a lot of that. A lot of guys had thrown around the idea for years of, I should have some on-farm grain storage, whether that's for corn. They were thinking about on the corn side, but now they're like, yeah, if we throw soybeans on top of this, makes perfect sense for us. Is let's put on our on-farm storage, on-farm processing. Let's save all that trucking cost. Let's mill these ourselves and ensure we're doing everything right. But that's a
Yeah.
big capital cost, and it takes a commitment. A lot of the guys want to, like every dairy, they would like to try it first. I want to see it in my herd before I commit to spending several $1 million. And that's the tricky part, is we can't just get them some Plenish soybeans that have been roasted and processed for them to try
Right.
for a while.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, what advice would you give to farmers who are considering setting up their own, yeah, farmers or even a feed mill that are looking at setting up their own processing and roasting facility?
Yeah, I would absolutely reach out to some folks who've done it. There's a lot to learn along the way. I already mentioned that roasting is not something you can just buy the equipment and go. We can, they can get a hold of us. We can put you in contact with folks all over the country who've done different styles, built different types of facilities using different styles of roasters, and how they've dealt with some of the challenges, how they've taken and tweaked some of the roasters. They slowed them down, turned up the heat, and done all these things to ensure they're doing the right job. Some people are putting in dryers in front of the roasters to supply a consistent temperature and moisture of soybean going into the roaster, and that's been helpful. But it
Makes
adds a little bit
sense.
of cost. But all those things, I think we can put you in touch with folks who've done all these different things, and that way you don't have to make the same mistake that they've made.
Absolutely. No, I think that's really all the questions I have. That was super helpful for myself to learn, and I know it will be for the viewers as well. Do you have anything else that you'd like to add on the topic of these soybeans?
The only thing would be that one of the other hindrances has been the soybeans themselves, up until this year, had only been available in a Roundup Ready package as far as weed control. And as of this year, we do have our latest technology, our Enlist E3 technology in these soybeans. So we know there are areas that had Roundup resistant weeds, and they were pretty reluctant to plant Plenish soybeans just for that reason. But moving forward, we're going to have these Enlist E3 beans in Plenish. The maturity currently is 1.9s and later soybeans. So there is a little bit of a gap when we get into northern areas. We get into Minnesota, northern Wisconsin, northern Michigan, the northern parts of New York. Those are typically ones, low ones, or group zero soybeans. That niche will be filled here in the next few years with the added demand for Plenish soybeans. Yeah, there's definitely, because the demand has increased, it's allowed Pioneer to put some resources to filling those gaps and fill that need in the industry.
That's awesome. I appreciate all the great information and your time, and you will call it a day.
All right, thank you.